The grey February rain fell in sheets against the windows of Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood's Charleston mansion. The year was 1836, and the widow's reputation as one of the wealthiest plantation owners in South Carolina remained unchallenged, even 3 years after her husband's passing. The massive white-columned home on Meeting Street stood as a testament to the family's prosperity, its manicured gardens and ornate ironwork the envy of Charleston society. Eleanor sat in her drawing room, a cup of imported tea cooling beside her as she penned correspondence. At 42, she maintained the severe beauty of her youth, her dark hair showing only faint streaks of silver at the temples. The sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the corner was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Enter," she commanded without looking up. Martha, her head-house servant, stepped inside, her eyes downcast. "Miss Charlotte has returned from her visit to Savannah, ma'am." Eleanor set her pen down. "Send her in immediately." Minutes later, her eldest daughter appeared. Charlotte, 23 and unmarried, had her mother's high cheekbones, but her late father's honey-blonde hair. Her traveling clothes were damp from the rain, but her face was flushed with more than the exertion of travel. "Mother," she said, curtsying slightly, "I've returned." Eleanor studied her daughter, noting the subtle changes in her figure, the fullness that hadn't been there 3 months prior. "I see Dr. Harrington's treatment was successful." Charlotte's hand unconsciously moved to her abdomen. "Yes, Mother, the doctor believes it took." "Excellent. You may rest today. Tomorrow, we'll begin your reintegration to society." Eleanor's voice was clinical, devoid of the warmth one might expect between mother and daughter. "You understand, of course, that we will maintain the story of your extended recovery from influenza." "Yes, Mother." Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. "And the child will be delivered to Willow Creek once it arrives, as we discussed." Charlotte's eyes remained fixed on the Turkish carpet beneath her feet. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Your sister Rebecca will be returning from her schooling in Philadelphia next month. I've already written to her about continuing the family tradition." At this, Charlotte finally looked up, her eyes flashing with something. Was it defiance? But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "She's only 17, Mother." "The same age you were when you began," Eleanor replied coolly. "The Blackwood bloodline has produced exceptional servants for generations. Your contribution is essential to maintaining our position." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white for a moment. The portraits of Blackwood ancestors seemed to watch disapprovingly from their gilded frames. "You may go," Eleanor dismissed her daughter, returning to her correspondence. As Charlotte turned to leave, Eleanor added, "And Charlotte, remember that what we do is necessary. The finest houses in Charleston compete for our servants." Your father understood this. "It's time you embraced your responsibility without question." When the door closed, Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Everything was proceeding according to plan. What the elite families of Charleston didn't know, what they could never know, was that the highly sought-after Blackwood house servants shared more than their exceptional training. They shared blood with the very family they served, a secret Eleanor guarded with ruthless determination. The rain continued to pour as night fell on Charleston, washing away any evidence of sins committed in the name of prosperity and social standing. Dr. James Harrington wiped his spectacles with a handkerchief as he sat in his study, surrounded by medical journals and anatomical drawings. At 55, his once robust frame had begun to stoop, and his beard had gone completely white. Beyond his reputation as Charleston's most respected physician lay a darker practice, one that had made him wealthier than medicine alone ever could. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. His housekeeper entered, carrying a sealed letter on a silver tray. "From Mrs. Blackwood, sir," she said, placing it before him. After she left, Harrington broke the wax seal bearing the Blackwood family crest. His eyes narrowed as he read Eleanor's elegant script. The procedure for Charlotte was successful. Prepare for Rebecca's arrival in April. The usual arrangement will be honored, with additional compensation for your discretion regarding certain rumors circulating about the Blackwood practices." Harrington set the letter down, his hand trembling slightly. He'd been complicit in Eleanor Blackwood's schemes for nearly 15 years, ever since her husband Thomas had approached him with an unusual proposition. The Blackwoods needed a physician who could ensure healthy pregnancies and discreet deliveries, and who would not question the parentage of the children born to the Blackwood daughters. He rose and walked to his cabinet, removing a leather-bound ledger locked with a small brass key. Inside were meticulous records of births, lineages and placements that would destroy his reputation and likely end in his imprisonment if discovered. Flipping through the pages, he paused at Charlotte Blackwood's entries. This would be her third contribution to her mother's enterprise. His memories drifted to Thomas Blackwood's death 3 years earlier. The official cause was heart failure, but Harrington had his suspicions. Eleanor had taken control of the family business with remarkable ease, expanding what her husband had begun into something far more calculating. A tap at his window jolted him from his thoughts. Just the rain, he reassured himself, but the unease remained. Lately, he'd begun to question his involvement. The payments from the Blackwoods had built this house, educated his sons at prestigious northern universities, and secured his retirement. But at what cost to his soul? He poured himself a generous glass of brandy and moved to his desk to pen his response to Eleanor. As he dipped his quill, a noise from the hallway caught his attention. Footsteps, then silence. Opening his door, he found the corridor empty, save for the flickering gas lamps casting long shadows on the wallpaper. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice echoing in the empty house. No response came, but as he turned back to his study, he could have sworn he saw a figure at the end of the hall, tall and masculine, reminiscent of the late Thomas Blackwood. When he blinked, the apparition was gone. Shaken, Harrington returned to his desk and hastily wrote his agreement to Eleanor's terms. As he sealed the envelope, he made a decision. This would be the last time he aided the Blackwood family. After Rebecca's treatment, he would retire, perhaps move north to Boston, where his eldest son practiced. "One last time," he whispered to himself, unaware that promises made in the shadow of such darkness rarely come to fruition. Willow Creek Plantation lay 15 miles outside Charleston, hidden behind rows of ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Unlike the Blackwood mansion in the city, this property remained absent from society pages and dinner conversations. Its existence was known, but not discussed, a working plantation that somehow produced the most coveted house servants in South Carolina. Daniel Cooper, the overseer, stood on the porch of the main house, watching as a carriage approached through the early morning mist. At 38, Cooper's weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime of hard work, but his eyes held a coldness that made even the strongest field hands lower their gaze in his presence. The carriage stopped, and a young black woman stepped out, carrying a bundle wrapped in fine linen. Cooper recognized her as Esther, one of Eleanor Blackwood's personal servants. "Miss Charlotte's child?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Esther nodded, her expression guarded. "Born yesterday morning. Mrs. Blackwood sends her regards and expects regular reports." Cooper took the bundle, pulling back the cloth to examine the sleeping infant. Fair skin, much lighter than most of the children born at Willow Creek, with wisps of blonde hair. "Another girl," he noted with satisfaction. "Mrs. Blackwood will be pleased. Girls fetch higher prices as house servants." Esther's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had delivered 3 of Charlotte's babies to this place over the years, watching each time as they disappeared into the separate nursery where the special stock was raised. She knew what became of these children, trained from infancy to serve in the finest homes, their heritage a carefully guarded secret. "Mrs. Blackwood also instructed me to deliver this," Esther said, handing Cooper a sealed envelope. He tucked it into his coat pocket without comment. "You'll be returning to Charleston immediately?" "Yes. Miss Charlotte needs attention. The birth was difficult. Something in Esther's tone suggested more than physical complications. As the carriage departed, Cooper carried the infant toward a whitewashed building set apart from the slave quarters. Inside, an older woman named Ruth tended to 5 other children of varying ages, all showing the distinctive Blackwood features diluted to varying degrees. "Another one from the main house," Cooper announced, handing the baby to Ruth. Ruth took the child with practiced hands. At 60, she had spent most of her life caring for the secret Blackwood descendants. "Charlotte's?" Cooper nodded. "Third one. The missus is planning to sell her firstborn soon. The girl's almost 8, prime age for training in a fine house." Ruth's face remained impassive, but her hands tightened protectively around the newborn. "Does this one have a name?" Cooper shrugged. "Does it matter? She'll be sold under whatever name her buyers prefer." After he left, Ruth sat in her rocking chair, cradling the infant. "Little one," she whispered, "your mama may not be able to claim you, but you are loved." She hummed softly, a melody from her own childhood passed down through generations. Outside the nursery window, a mockingbird sang in the branches of a willow tree, its song carrying across the plantation fields where men and women toiled under the strengthening sun, unaware of the newly arrived child who shared their blood and the blood of those who claimed ownership over them all. Rebecca Blackwood's return to Charleston coincided with the start of the social season. At 17, she embodied the ideal Southern belle. Educated at a prestigious Philadelphia finishing school, accomplished in music and French, and possessing a delicate beauty that had already attracted several potential suitors. Eleanor watched with calculated pride as her younger daughter charmed guests at the welcome home gathering in the Blackwood garden. Rebecca's innocence was her most valuable asset, an innocence that would soon be put to Eleanor's purposes. "She's grown into such a lovely young woman," remarked Mrs. Hartwell, the wife of a prominent judge. "You must be fielding marriage proposals already." "Not several," Eleanor confirmed with a practiced smile. "But Rebecca will continue her education for another year before considering marriage." Another year would allow for at least 2 contributions to the Blackwood enterprise before Rebecca was married off to strengthen the family's social connections. Across the garden, Charlotte sat beneath a magnolia tree, her figure once again slim after her recent illness. Her eyes rarely left her younger sister, a mixture of protection and resignation in her gaze. As the guests mingled, sipping champagne and sampling delicacies prepared by the Blackwood kitchen staff, a newcomer arrived. John Thornton, recently returned from studying law in Boston, caused a stir among the unmarried ladies with his tall frame and thoughtful demeanor. "Mrs. Blackwood," he bowed slightly as he greeted Eleanor. "Thank you for including me in your celebration." "Mr. Thornton," Eleanor nodded, "your father speaks highly of your accomplishments. Harvard Law, I understand?" "Yes, ma'am." His northern education had softened his southern accent, but not erased it. "Though I'm afraid my views on certain institutions may have been influenced by my time there." Eleanor's smile remained fixed, but her eyes cooled. "Indeed? How fascinating that must be for you." Before the conversation could continue, Rebecca approached, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "Mother, Mrs. Sullivan has asked if I might play the pianoforte." "Of course, dear. Mr. Thornton, have you met my younger daughter?" John's expression changed subtly as he turned to Rebecca. "I haven't had the pleasure." Their introduction was brief, but charged with an energy that did not escape Eleanor's notice. As Rebecca moved toward the house, where the Blackwoods' grand pianoforte awaited, John's eyes followed her. "Your daughter is quite accomplished, I'm told," he said to Eleanor. "Both my daughters are everything a mother could hope for," Eleanor replied. "Obedient, well-bred, and dedicated to upholding family traditions." Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Eleanor summoned Rebecca to her study. Charlotte lingered in the hallway, her ear pressed against the door. "You made an excellent impression today," Eleanor told her younger daughter. Particularly on young Mr. Thornton, Rebecca smiled. He was very kind. His views on abolition are quite progressive. That is not a topic for polite conversation, Rebecca. Eleanor's tone was sharp. Now, I've arranged for you to visit Dr. Harrington tomorrow. A simple examination to ensure your Philadelphia schooling hasn't affected your health. Charlotte closed her eyes outside the door, knowing what this examination truly entailed. The same visit she had made at 17, when her mother had explained the Blackwood legacy and her role in it. The finest bloodlines in Charleston, Eleanor had told her then. Carefully selected for intelligence, beauty, and temperament. Our house servants fetch the highest prices because they are superior stock. And you, my dear, will continue this tradition. Charlotte had been told which overseers to receive, when to report to Dr. Harrington, and how to conceal the resulting pregnancies. Each child had been taken to Willow Creek, where they would be raised until old enough to be sold to wealthy families throughout the South. Now, Rebecca would face the same future. Charlotte pushed the door open without knocking. "Mother," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "May I speak with you privately?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she dismissed Rebecca, who slipped past her sister with a confused glance. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Eleanor demanded once they were alone. "Spare Rebecca," Charlotte said simply. "I'll provide enough children for your business. Let her marry, have a normal life." Eleanor's laugh was cold. "And what would you know of normal life, Charlotte? You've never known anything but this house and your duty to it." "Exactly," Charlotte whispered, "and I would spare her that knowledge." In the silence that followed, the grandfather clock ticked loudly, counting down moments in a household where time brought not healing but further descent into darkness. The office of Sullivan and Thornton Law occupied the second floor of a handsome brick building on Broad Street. John Thornton sat at his desk, poring over documents related to the estate of a recently deceased merchant. His father, the senior partner, had given him this case as a test of his abilities. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. The clerk entered, bearing a sealed letter. "Delivered by hand, sir." The messenger said it was urgent. John frowned at the unmarked envelope. Breaking the seal, he unfolded a single sheet of paper containing only a few lines in a feminine hand. "If you seek truth about Charleston's most reputable families, visit Willow Creek Plantation at midnight on Friday. Come alone and tell no one. What you discover may aid your progressive causes." There was no signature. John turned the paper over, finding nothing more. "Who delivered this?" "A colored woman, sir, didn't give her name. Said she works at the Blackwood house." John's thoughts immediately went to Rebecca Blackwood. Their brief meeting at her homecoming party had left a strong impression. Her intelligence and subtle wit had shone through the superficial conversation, and he'd sensed in her a kindred spirit, someone questioning the world around them. He had also noticed Charlotte Blackwood's haunted expression and the way Eleanor watched her daughters like a hawk studying prey. Something about the Blackwood household troubled him, though he couldn't place what. That evening, John invited his friend Dr. Michael Reynolds to dinner at his modest home. Reynolds, a young physician who had studied in Philadelphia, had returned to Charleston with ideas about medical practice that many found radical. "I need your professional opinion," John said as they sat in his study after the meal. "What do you know of Dr. James Harrington?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Respected physician, attends to most of the old families. Conservative in his methods, resistant to new medical theories. Why do you ask?" John hesitated. "I'm handling an estate matter that involves some unusual medical arrangements." "Unusual how?" "I'm not at liberty to say. But hypothetically, if a physician were involved in something unethical, how might one prove it?" Reynolds leaned forward. "Medical records would be the key evidence, but doctors guard those jealously. Harrington, especially, keeps everything under lock and key. There are rumors, though." "What kind of rumors?" "Nothing substantial. Some of his patients, young women from prominent families, disappear for months, supposedly for treatments at private facilities. They return changed somehow. subdued. Reynolds shrugged. Probably nothing. The wealthy have always had access to discreet care for nervous conditions or indiscretions. The conversation turned to other matters, but John's mind kept returning to the mysterious note and its possible connection to the Blackwood family. Friday night found him riding toward Willow Creek Plantation, a lantern hanging from his saddle, casting weak light on the rutted road. The moon was nearly full, illuminating the countryside in silvery light. As he approached the plantation, John extinguished his lantern and tethered his horse in a grove of trees. The main house was dark, except for a single light in what appeared to be an office. Moving cautiously, he made his way toward the building, keeping to the shadows. A figure emerged from behind a tree, causing John to start. It was Esther, the Blackwood servant who had delivered the note. "You came," she whispered. "Follow me, quickly." She led him not to the main house, but to a smaller structure separated from the slave quarters. "The nursery," she explained softly. "See for yourself." John peered through the window. Inside, by the light of a single candle, an elderly black woman rocked a fair-skinned infant. 5 other children slept in small beds along the wall, their faces showing varying degrees of mixed heritage. "I don't understand," John said. "Look closer," Esther urged. "The oldest girl, Emma, she's almost 8. John studied the sleeping child. Something in her features sparked recognition. "She resembles Charlotte Blackwood," he murmured. "Her daughter," Esther confirmed. "All these children were born to the Blackwood daughters, fathered by overseers selected by Mrs. Blackwood for specific traits. When they're old enough, they're sold as house servants to wealthy families who pay premium prices, never knowing they're buying the grandchildren of their peers." John stepped back from the window, his mind reeling. "How long has this been happening?" "Since before Mr. Blackwood died. But Mrs. Eleanor made it a true business. She calls it selective breeding. Dr. Harrington assists with the medical aspects and keeps records of the lineages." In the distance, a dog barked. Esther stiffened. "Cooper's making his rounds. You must go." As John prepared to leave, he asked, "Why tell me this?" Esther's eyes glistened with tears in the moonlight. "Miss Rebecca. She doesn't know what awaits her. Charlotte tried to protect her, but Mrs. Eleanor has her appointment with Dr. Harrington tomorrow. Once he administers his examination, her fate will be sealed like her sister's." The weight of this knowledge settled on John's shoulders as he rode back to Charleston, the elegant houses and manicured gardens of the city now seeming like mere facades, concealing unimaginable cruelty. Dr. James Harrington's hands shook as he prepared his instruments for Rebecca Blackwood's appointment. Sleep had eluded him for days, haunted by visions of Thomas Blackwood's stern face watching him from darkened corners of his bedroom. Twice he had awakened to find his ledger of Blackwood procedures moved from its locked drawer to his desk, though no one else had keys to his study. A knock announced his housekeeper. "The Blackwood carriage has arrived, Doctor." Harrington nodded, straightening his waistcoat and composing his features into a professional mask. In the waiting room, Rebecca sat beside her mother, looking apprehensive, but unaware of what truly awaited her. "Miss Rebecca," he greeted with forced cheerfulness. "How good to see you again. You've grown into quite the young lady during your time in Philadelphia." "Thank you, Doctor." "Harrington," Rebecca replied, her manner polite but reserved. Eleanor rose. "I've explained to Rebecca that you'll be conducting a thorough examination to ensure her health after her time away. I'll wait here." As Harrington led Rebecca to his examination room, a commotion erupted from the street. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering around a man shouting and waving papers. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked, moving toward the window. Harrington pulled her away. "Nothing of concern, likely just another abolitionist rabble-rouser. Now about your examination." His housekeeper burst in without knocking. "Doctor, you're needed immediately. There's been a terrible accident at the Sullivan and Thornton offices. Mr. Sullivan is gravely injured." Harrington hesitated, looking between Rebecca and his housekeeper. "I'm with a patient," They specifically requested you, sir. Said to tell you it concerns matters you and Judge Hartwell have discussed privately." The color drained from Harrington's face. Judge Hartwell was one of the few who knew about the Blackwood arrangement, having purchased 3 servants over the years. If there had been some exposure— "Mrs. Blackwood," he called, returning to the waiting room, "I'm afraid I must attend to an emergency. We'll need to reschedule Rebecca's examination." Eleanor's expression darkened. "This is most inconvenient, Doctor. Rebecca's schedule is quite full with her return to society." "Tomorrow morning," Harrington promised, already reaching for his medical bag. "First appointment." After they departed, Harrington rushed to the law offices, only to find the building perfectly calm, no sign of any accident. The clerk at the desk looked confused when Harrington demanded to know about Judge Hartwell. "No one's been here asking for you, Doctor," the young man said, "and Judge Hartwell hasn't visited today." Realization dawned slowly. He had been lured away from his office, away from Rebecca's examination. But who would— A chill ran down his spine as he hurried back, suddenly certain of what he would find. His study door stood ajar, the lock broken. The secret drawer where he kept his ledger hung open, empty. "No," he whispered, searching frantically through papers scattered across his desk. "No, no, no." A folded note lay where the ledger should have been. "The sins of Charleston's elite can no longer remain hidden. Justice comes for all, even those who believe themselves above God's law." Harrington collapsed into his chair, understanding with terrible clarity what would happen next. His records detailed every Blackwood child born over 15 years. Dates, parentage, physical characteristics, sale prices, and purchasing families. If that information became public, the scandal would destroy not just the Blackwoods, but dozens of Charleston's most prominent families. He opened his desk drawer and removed a small pistol he kept for protection. Setting it before him, he stared at it for a long moment before taking out paper and pen to write a final confession. As he wrote, the shadows in his office seemed to deepen, and once again he felt Thomas Blackwood's presence watching him, waiting. "I've done terrible things," he whispered to the empty room. "Forgive me." The sound of the gunshot echoed through the quiet Charleston street, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. Charlotte Blackwood knelt in the small chapel behind her family's mansion, her prayers interrupted by the news delivered moments earlier by a breathless servant. Dr. Harrington dead by his own hand, a scandal brewing in whispered conversations throughout Charleston's elite circles. She knew what it meant. 15 years of secrets threatened to spill into public view, 15 years of children born and sold like prized livestock. Her children, taken from her arms to serve in houses where their own blood relatives might give them orders, never knowing their true heritage. The chapel door opened behind her. Eleanor entered, her face composed but her eyes burning with cold fury. "Did you know about this?" she demanded without preamble. Charlotte rose slowly. "About Dr. Harrington. I only just heard, not about his suicide, about his records being stolen beforehand, about John Thornton visiting Willow Creek last night." Charlotte's breath caught. "John Thornton? I don't understand." Don't play innocent with me," Eleanor hissed, moving closer. "Someone has been talking. Someone led that self-righteous lawyer to our plantation, showed him the nursery. Was it you? Did you betray this family?" "No," Charlotte whispered, though a spark of hope ignited in her chest. If Thornton had seen the nursery, if he had Harrington's records— Eleanor studied her daughter's face. "I don't believe you, but it doesn't matter. I've sent Cooper to retrieve all the children from Willow Creek. They'll be moved to our property in Georgia until this blows over." "The children?" Charlotte's voice strengthened. "My children? You're moving them?" "They are Blackwood investments," Eleanor corrected coldly. "And yes, I'm protecting our assets. Judge Hartwell has assured me that any accusations will be dismissed in his court. Without Harrington to testify, it will be the word of servants against one of Charleston's oldest families." Charlotte felt something break inside her. the last remnant of obedience that had kept her submissive for so long. "No," she said, the word foreign on her tongue after years of acquiescence. "No, Mother. This ends now." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? I've written everything down. My experiences, the dates, the names of the overseers you selected, the families who bought my children. If anything happens to those children, my account will be delivered to every newspaper in Charleston and beyond." "You wouldn't dare," Eleanor breathed. "You destroy yourself along with this family." "I have nothing left to lose," Charlotte replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "You've taken everything from me since I was 17 years old. My dignity, my choice, my children." For the first time in Charlotte's memory, Eleanor seemed uncertain. "What do you want?" Rebecca remains untouched by this. "She leaves for Boston tomorrow to stay with relatives until the situation is resolved, and my children, all of them, will be acknowledged as Blackwoods and provided for according to their birthright." "Impossible," Eleanor scoffed. The scandal is coming regardless," Charlotte interrupted. "Harrington's records will ensure that. The only question is whether the Blackwood name survives in any form." A knock at the chapel door prevented Eleanor's response. Martha entered, her expression grave. "Mr. Thornton is at the front door, ma'am, with the sheriff." Eleanor straightened her spine, composing her features. "Show them to the drawing room. Tell them I'll be with them momentarily." When Martha left, Eleanor turned back to her daughter. "This isn't finished." Charlotte watched her mother leave, then sank to her knees again. This time, her prayers were of gratitude rather than supplication, her thoughts on the children she might finally be allowed to claim as her own. Outside the chapel window, a mockingbird sang, the same melody she had heard at Willow Creek whenever she visited her secret children, watching from a distance as they played under Ruth's watchful eye, never allowed to call her mother. The bird's song seemed different now, not a lament but a promise. The Charleston courthouse overflowed with spectators, the summer heat made unbearable by the press of bodies, eager to witness the scandal that had rocked South Carolina society. John Thornton stood before Judge Williams, who had replaced Judge Hartwell after the latter recused himself for personal connections to the case. "Your Honor," Thornton addressed the court, "the evidence before you documents a systematic program of exploitation spanning 15 years. Dr. Harrington's records provide irrefutable proof that Eleanor Blackwood forced her own daughters into bearing children who were then sold as servants to unknowing buyers." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. In the front row, Rebecca Blackwood sat beside Charlotte, their hands clasped tightly. Eleanor was notably absent, having fled to the family's Georgia property 2 days after the investigation began. "These records," Thornton continued, holding up the leather-bound ledger, "detail the lineage, physical characteristics, and sale prices of 27 children born to Charlotte Blackwood and her late sister Margaret, who died in childbirth 4 years ago, a death that was attributed to fever in public announcements." Charlotte closed her eyes at the mention of her older sister, whose resistance to their mother's schemes had resulted in her being confined to Willow Creek during her pregnancy, where neglect had led to complications Eleanor refused to address. "The court recognizes that these allegations are of a most disturbing nature," Judge Williams said. "However, without Eleanor Blackwood present to defend herself, we cannot proceed to judgment." Thornton nodded. "We understand, Your Honor. Today we seek not judgment but recognition. Recognition of the Blackwood descendants' rightful heritage and the legal measures to protect them from further exploitation." The judge peered over his spectacles. "And what does Miss Charlotte Blackwood seek in this matter?" Charlotte rose, her voice clear despite her nerves. "I seek custody of my biological children and their recognition as Blackwoods, with all the legal protections that entails. I also request guardianship of my sister Margaret's children, as their closest living relative willing to acknowledge them." The proceedings continued for hours, with testimony from Esther and Ruth, about conditions at Willow Creek and the treatment of the children born to the Blackwood daughters. Most shocking to the Charleston elite were the names listed in Harrington's ledger, prominent families who had unknowingly purchased servants who were, by blood, their social equals. When court adjourned for the day, Charlotte and Rebecca exited to find Michael Reynolds waiting. "Dr. Reynolds," Charlotte greeted him with a tired smile. "Thank you for your testimony about Margaret's death." The young doctor nodded solemnly. "It was the least I could do. I've prepared the house as you requested. The children arrived from Willow Creek an hour ago. Ruth is with them." Charlotte's composure nearly broke at this news. "They're really here? In Charleston?" "At the Pinckney Street house, yes, all 8 of them. The others have been located in various households and will be gradually transitioned to your care, as the judge indicated." As they walked through the courthouse square, John Thornton joined them, offering his arm to Rebecca. Their courtship, begun during the investigation, had progressed rapidly, with plans for a Boston wedding in the fall. "What news of Mother?" Rebecca asked quietly. "The authorities in Savannah report she boarded a ship bound for Europe 3 days ago," John replied. "She emptied several bank accounts before leaving." Charlotte nodded, unsurprised. Eleanor would rebuild elsewhere, her wealth ensuring a comfortable exile. The Blackwood name in Charleston was ruined, but Charlotte found she cared little for society's opinion. Her thoughts were consumed by the children waiting for her, her children who would finally know her as their mother. "Are you certain about this?" John asked gently. "The scandal will follow you for years." "Society will not easily accept. I've lived my entire life according to society's expectations," Charlotte replied, her voice steady. "It brought nothing but pain. My children deserve better. They deserve the truth, no matter how complicated." As their carriage approached the Pinckney Street house, Charlotte felt her heart race. Through the window she could see children playing in the garden, fair-haired and dark, ranging from toddlers to her eldest daughter, Emma, now 8 years old. For a moment she hesitated, her hand on the carriage door. What would she say to them? How could she explain the circumstances of their births, their time at Willow Creek, the truth of their heritage? Rebecca squeezed her sister's hand. "One day at a time," she said softly. "They need love more than explanations right now." Charlotte nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped down from the carriage. As her feet touched the ground, Emma looked up from her play, her eyes, so like Charlotte's own, widening in recognition. "It's the lady who brings presents," she said to the younger children. "The one Ruth says watches over us." Charlotte knelt on the garden path, opening her arms as Emma approached cautiously. "Hello, Emma," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My name is Charlotte. I've come to take care of you now." Behind her, the summer sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden where a new kind of family was taking its first tentative steps toward healing. Autumn came to Charleston with cooler winds and the gradual return of families who had fled to summer homes to escape both the heat and the scandal that had dominated conversation throughout the season. The Pinckney Street house, once the property of a bachelor uncle of the Blackwoods, now bustled with life as Charlotte established her unconventional household. The adaptation had not been easy. The older children, particularly Emma and Margaret's son William, had questions Charlotte struggled to answer truthfully while respecting their youth. The younger ones simply needed stability after the upheaval of leaving Willow Creek and the only home they had known. Ruth had been invaluable, providing continuity for the children while helping Charlotte learn to be a mother in practice, as well as name. Esther had joined the household as well, her testimony against Eleanor earning her not only freedom, but Charlotte's eternal gratitude. That October morning, Charlotte sat at her desk writing correspondence when a knock interrupted her. Ruth entered, looking troubled. "Miss Charlotte, there's a Mrs. Hartwell here to see you, says it's urgent." Charlotte set down her pen with a frown. The Hartwells had been among the families implicated in Harrington's records, having purchased 2 Blackwood descendants over the years. Judge Hartwell had managed to keep his name mostly clear of the scandal by quickly recusing himself. but the family had noticeably avoided Charlotte since the trial. "Show her to the drawing room, please." Mrs. Hartwell stood when Charlotte entered, her once plump figure noticeably thinner, her face lined with stress. "Miss Blackwood," she greeted stiffly. "Thank you for receiving me." "Of course, please sit. Can I offer you tea?" Mrs. Hartwell shook her head. "This isn't a social call. I've come about James." Charlotte's confusion must have shown on her face. "The boy," Mrs. Hartwell clarified. 9 years old. Purchased from Willow Creek in 33. Your son, according to the court proceedings." Understanding dawned. "Yes. James is one of the children we haven't yet been able to locate. Several families left Charleston before the court could issue orders regarding the children." Mrs. Hartwell's hands twisted in her lap. "We didn't leave. But my husband, he sent James away when the scandal broke to protect our family name." Charlotte leaned forward. "Sent him where, Mrs. Hartwell?" To his brother's plantation in Louisiana." Tears welled in the older woman's eyes. "I didn't know until yesterday. I thought James was still with our household in the country house." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because he's dying." Mrs. Hartwell's composure finally broke. "Yellow fever. My husband received word yesterday. The doctor doesn't expect him to survive the week." Charlotte felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Another child she would never know, another life cut short by her mother's schemes and the cruelty they enabled. "I need to go to him," she said, standing abruptly. "Where in Louisiana?" "St. Francisville. But Charlotte, it's too far. You'd never arrive in time, and the fever—" "He is my son," Charlotte said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I will not let him die among strangers." The journey was arduous. A ship to New Orleans, then a steamboat up the Mississippi, finally a hired carriage to the Hartwell brothers' plantation. Charlotte traveled with Dr. Reynolds, whose expertise with yellow fever might offer some hope, however slim. They arrived at Magnolia Hill Plantation on November 2nd, 6 days after leaving Charleston. The main house stood on a gentle rise, surrounded by fields where enslaved workers harvested late-season cotton. Charlotte was shown to a small outbuilding serving as a sick room. Inside, a boy lay on a narrow bed. His skin yellowed, his breathing shallow. A young woman sat beside him, placing cool cloths on his forehead. "James?" Charlotte approached slowly. The boy's eyes fluttered open, revealing a shade of blue identical to her own. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Charlotte knelt beside the bed, taking his hand gently. "I'm Charlotte. I've come to take you home." Behind her, Dr. Reynolds conferred with the plantation doctor, their voices low as they discussed treatments and chances of recovery. "I dreamed about you," James said, his gaze clearing briefly. "A lady in blue who sang by my window." Charlotte's breath caught. She had visited Willow Creek exactly once after James was born, wearing a blue dress and singing softly outside the nursery, afraid to enter but desperate for one glimpse of her firstborn. "It wasn't a dream," she told him, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead. "I was there. I've been looking for you for a very long time." For 3 days and nights, Charlotte remained at James's bedside, while Dr. Reynolds fought to save him with treatments more advanced than those the plantation doctor had attempted. On the 4th morning, James's fever broke. "He'll recover," Reynolds announced, exhaustion evident in his face, though he'll need careful attention during his convalescence. By mid-December, James was strong enough to travel. He sat beside Charlotte on the steamboat returning to New Orleans, watching the Mississippi's brown waters churn beside them. "Will they like me? The others?" he asked, his first mention of the siblings waiting in Charleston. "They'll love you," Charlotte assured him. "Emma has been asking about you every day since I told her about her older brother." James nodded thoughtfully. "And we're really free? Not servants anymore?" "Really free," Charlotte confirmed. "Though the world won't make it easy for us. People in Charleston still whisper when we pass." "Let them whisper," James said with a determination that reminded Charlotte painfully of Margaret. "We know who we are, As New Orleans came into view, its waterfront bustling with ships and commerce, Charlotte felt a sense of possibility she had never known in Charleston. Perhaps, she thought, watching James's face light up at the sight of the busy port, it was time for a fresh start somewhere new. Somewhere the Blackwood name carried no history, where her children could be judged by their character rather than the circumstances of their birth. The ship that would carry them back to Charleston awaited, but for the first time, Charlotte questioned whether they should board it. The Pinckney Street house had served its purpose as a gathering place, but it wasn't truly home, not with its proximity to the society that had enabled their suffering. "What would you think," she asked James, "of Boston? Rebecca writes that the winters are cold, but the people are kinder about certain things." James considered this seriously. "Could we still be a family there, all of us together?" "All of us," Charlotte promised, "together." The decision crystallized as they stood on the New Orleans dock, the future spreading before them like the wide Mississippi, powerful, unpredictable, but flowing ever forward. Boston, 1843. Snow fell gently past the windows of the brick townhouse on Mount Vernon Street, where a Christmas tree stood decorated in the German tradition Rebecca had adopted from her Boston neighbors. 7 years had passed since the Blackwood scandal had rocked Charleston society, 7 years of rebuilding lives shattered by generations of cruelty and exploitation. Charlotte, now 37, watched as her children and nieces and nephews gathered around the piano where Emma, 15 and remarkably talented, played carols, while the younger ones sang with more enthusiasm than skill. James, 16 and studying law under John Thornton's guidance, turned pages for his sister, his recovery from yellow fever so complete that few would guess he had once been given up for dead. Rebecca entered from the kitchen carrying a tray of cookies, her 3-year-old daughter Catherine clinging to her skirts. Marriage to John had given her the stability and love Eleanor had never provided, while her work with abolitionist groups had given her purpose beyond society's narrow expectations. "A letter arrived from Ruth," she told Charlotte quietly, settling beside her sister on the window seat. "Cooper died last month. The new owners of Willow Creek have converted it to a cotton processing facility. No more breeding programs, she says." Charlotte nodded, absorbing this information. Ruth had chosen to remain in Charleston, using her freedom and the money Charlotte had settled on her to establish a school for colored children. Her monthly letters kept them connected to the world they had left behind. "And Mother?" Charlotte asked, though she knew the answer would be the same as always. "Still in Paris," according to Judge Hartwell's correspondent. Living under her maiden name, apparently quite comfortable among expatriates who don't question her past. Eleanor remained a shadow over their lives, though a diminishing one. The children knew only that their grandmother had done terrible things and lived far away. Charlotte had decided they would learn the full truth when they were older, though she dreaded that conversation and the pain it would inevitably cause. The front door opened, letting in a swirl of snowflakes, and John Thornton, his arms laden with last-minute gifts. The children swarmed him, relieving him of packages and pulling him toward the fire to warm up. "Court adjourned early due to the weather," he announced, kissing Rebecca and nodding warmly to Charlotte. "Judge Wilson sends his regards and an invitation for Christmas dinner tomorrow." Their circle in Boston had grown gradually. Fellow attorneys John had met through his practice, families from the children's schools, members of Rebecca's abolitionist society. Not all embraced their unusual family structure, but enough did to make life in Massachusetts far more comfortable than it would have been in South Carolina. As evening fell, the family gathered for dinner in the large dining room. Charlotte, at the head of the table, looked at the faces surrounding her, 14 children ranging from 3 to 18, Rebecca and John, Dr. E. Reynolds and his wife, who had joined them in Boston 3 years earlier, and several friends who had nowhere else to spend the holiday. "Before we begin," Charlotte said, rising with a glass of wine, "I'd like to propose a toast to family, not the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build together, to truth." however difficult, and to courage, which makes everything else possible. To courage, they echoed, even the youngest children lifting their glasses of cider. Later, as the house quieted and the children were tucked into beds, Charlotte sat alone in her study, a candle burning low beside her. She opened her journal, the 37th volume since she'd begun recording her life as a girl of 17, newly awakened to her mother's horrific plans. December 24th, 1843, she wrote. 7 years since our escape from Charleston. The children thrive. James talks of Harvard Law next year. Emma has been offered a position teaching music at the Perkins School. The younger ones grow too quickly, asking questions that become harder to deflect about their origins, about why some have my eyes while others have features I don't recognize from our family line. She paused, her pen hovering over the page. I still dream of Willow Creek sometimes, of the nursery where my children were kept from me, of the systematic cruelty disguised as business acumen. I wonder what might have happened if Mother had succeeded in bringing Rebecca into her scheme. How many more lives would have been distorted by her vision of the Blackwood legacy? A soft knock interrupted her writing. James stood in the doorway, a book under his arm. Couldn't sleep, she asked, setting aside her journal. He shook his head. I was thinking about next Christmas. If I'm at Harvard, I might not make it home if the weather's bad. We'll make it work, Charlotte assured him. This family has overcome far greater obstacles than a Massachusetts snowstorm. James smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. That's what I told William. We're Blackwoods. We endure. After he left, Charlotte returned to her journal, adding a final line before closing it for the night. The name that once represented Charleston's darkest secret has been reclaimed by those who were meant to be its victims. My children call themselves Blackwoods with pride, knowing not the shame of their conception, but the triumph of their liberation. In this, at least, we have won. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the streets of Boston in a blanket of white that would greet them on Christmas morning. A fresh start, a clean page, a new story waiting to be written.